Hi all of you, and welcome to part 4 of the kidney. In this section, we're going to look at how it is that the kidney concentrates urine. How it is that the kidney filters 180 liters but doesn't urinate out 180 liters. What it has to do is reabsorb that water again. But there's no such thing as a water pump, like there's a sodium-potassium pump. And you can go against the concentration gradient, but that doesn't exist for water. So the only way you can make water move to a place is to increase the solute concentration, to make it very salty. And then solutes suck, water goes there. So how you achieve that is in the kidney is by making certain areas of the kidney, the medulla of the kidney, very salty. We talked about how if you're going to eat a kidney, it's really salty. So how do you achieve that? And I'm going to start out with this concept of countercurrent flow because that's what is working inside the kidney. But to illustrate it, first of all, I'm going to use it in terms of heat and not volume of water because it's easier to understand. So imagine an anatomical structure where you had blood vessels that were bringing warm blood down to a limb, to a finger, let's say. And then it twisted around and these little veins were getting cooler and cooler because this warm blood is disseminating heat through this finger. And as it goes climbing back up into the heart again, it's going to be cooler and cooler and cooler. And you kind of lose a lot of heat that way. And if you wanted to save that heat, and grasp that heat, what you would do is what you see inside B here. In B, anatomically, you would put these two vessels completely side by side. And then when that warm blood is trying to disseminate that heat, it's radiating some heat out, but a lot of it is going straight back to the other vessel, which is right next to it. So notice that in A here, the temperature in this location of this warm blood is very different from here, right? We'll just call this 1 and 2. And now when you come to this side, region 1 and region 2 are very similar. Why? Because as it goes losing heat, it goes losing it to the neighboring vessel and dispersing a little bit maybe. And so these two are going to be no different in what their temperature holds. So location 1 and location 2 is going to be very similar in that temperature. So that's an analogy. I mean, that happens in the body. That's how we warm up some of these vessels. But let's look at what happens in the kidney. In the kidney, we have opposite flow of blood in the ascending and descending Henle limbs, right? And that's what's going to allow us to multiply the salt and make it really salty within the kidney. So that spatial organization is very important. If you had already wondered why the loop, why do you have something that goes down and loopy loops back up again, right? What's the importance of that? Well, there is an importance. What's happening is this active transport of salt, of sodium chloride, out of the ascending limb. Okay, so keep that straight. Salt out of ascending limb. And that makes it so that the osmolarity of that interstitial fluid is high, right? It's pumping salt out into nowhere land, into interstitial fluid land. And that's becoming very salty. And so then the region in the descending limb is going to undergo osmosis because as it descends down and it's so salty, it goes losing water towards the salt as solutes suck. So if this isn't clear, I'm going to show you lots of pictures, so don't worry. This is a very general one. This is just relative to salt. It's called the countercurrent multiplier. And so if in one region of this loop, there was a barrier to the movement of salt, no salt moved. But in the other loop, there's not a barrier. You pump it out. and you're pumping out that salt, and we're going to make it as little drops like this. So it gets very salty, and it gets super salty down here, correct? In fact, it gets a lot more salty the deeper you go. So here we have then in the ascending loop a mechanism that has these channels here that are allowed to pump salt out and make this very salty. So that gradient, due to that active transport of sodium, is going to affect the descending loop. The opposite flow, I'm telling you, in ascending and descending limbs multiplies an effect. So the spatial organization is important. And let's start with the ascending limb. So it's funny to start with the ascending limb because when you draw this, right, it's the one that goes down comes first. But I don't want to start with that one. I want to start with the one that's going back up again. So the one that's going back up again is impermeable to water. And the volume stays the same. It's not going to change any of that volume of water. It actively transports sodium chloride into the interstitial fluids. And I've said that it's going to fill with salt. And the filtrate, think of what happens to the filtrate that stayed behind, becomes less concentrated than the plasma that fed into it, that fed into the glomerulus and came down through the nephron. And so if we gave a number to it, it's about 100 less milliosmoles. But let me show you in pictures in a minute. The descending limb is freely permeable to water. And so if it's permeable to water and it's coming down into an area that's very salty, then the volume is going to decrease and it's going to lose water to that interstitial fluid at first. And then that interstitial fluid isn't going to just sit there and cause edema. Instead, it's going to go back into the vasa recta. It's going to go back into those peritubular capillaries. So the descending limb is impermeable to solutes. The descending limb is not pumping out salt. Okay? All it's doing is losing water. So if it loses water, tell me if this makes sense, it's becoming more concentrated. It's becoming saltier because it can't lose the salt, but it does lose the water. So it's becoming more concentrated. And the concentration ranges in milliosmoles, is how we measure it, from the cortex, from about 300 milliosmoles to about 1,200 down deep in the medulla. Okay, this is probably very confusing to you, so now let's do it with pictures. Descending limb, ascending limb. When I talk to you about it, I first talked to you about this one, the ascending limb. We started with that one. What does it do? I'm going to read it to you here. It's going to pump out sodium, chlorine, and potassium, and just pump that salt out so that all this area is going to be very, very salty. But notice that in red here, it is impermeable to water. So it's not going to, water usually follows, right, solute suck. But this membrane here is special. This membrane does not allow the passage of water. Okay? So ascending, pump out salt, don't allow the water. So let's go to the descending. What happens in the descending? Well, in the descending limb is the opposite. We are coming down into a very salty area that was created by this side. It's getting very, very salty, so you lose water and you don't do anything to the salt. So if you lose water and you started out at 300 milliosmoles, which is what the concentration of salt in blood is, it makes sense that it should rise and it should go to 600 and then to 700 to 800 to 900. Depending the length of this loop, it's going to get more and more concentrated because of the loss of water. And now it's really concentrated, 1,200 milliosmoles, and it's coming up here. And guess what? We have the active transport of sodium chloride possible. So we pump it back out again. And you pump it back out and you make it very salty. And so that ability to pump that salt out in one place and not in the other and allow water to leave here, then that water doesn't just stay and cause edema. As I said, that is in close proximity to these vessels, the vasa recta, the peritubular capillaries, and that water is going to go right back into circulation. And those 180 liters are going to be saved. So my little buckets here is on this side, we're dumping salt, making it very salty everywhere. On this side, we're dumping water. And where is it going? It's going back into the blood. Okay, so now this blood here is going to, is going to be receiving that water. And even though this is concentrated, it's going to be receiving more and more water that can travel across, and we reabsorb water. Remember, the ultimate goal of this is to not have the water end up here and urinate it all out. What you need to do is reabsorb it. Okay, I hope that's semi-clear here. I'm going to backtrack again here. Take a look at these diagrams in the book. I just want to tell you how important this is, that you understand what's going on here. I'm not that worried about the numbers. The numbers are just there for you to see how concentrated this ends up being, and helping you understand that mechanism of that movement of water. Okay? Important for you to know what happens in the ascending limb, what happens in the descending limb. Okay, those are not the only mechanisms that are going to retain water. Another important mechanism for retaining water is the effect of hormones in this system. So two particularly we're going to talk about. One is ADH, also called vasopressin, anti-diuretic hormone. If it's anti-diuretic, and diuresis is urination or loss of water, then anti-diuretic is the saving of water. It's trying to have you reabsorb it and not lose it. And also aldosterone. Those two hormones, and what's the effect of them? So we draw again the proximal tubule, the descending limb, ascending limb, and collecting duct. And we have isosmotic fluid leaving the proximal tubule. This is pretty much like blood, and it progressively becomes more concentrated. I'm reading it here to you in the descending limb. And as it comes up, the removal of solute in the thick ascending limb creates hypoosmotic fluid, slightly lower than it was before. And now, in this area of the distal tubule and collecting duct, notice how it's in purple here. Hormones are going to have their effect. So they control that distal nephron, and they control the permeability of water and solutes. So we remember that we can still reabsorb this in this region and block the permeability of water. And the blocking of the permeability of water here in the collecting duct is due to the effect of hormones. I think I'm going to stop this right here and add on one more lecture for this chapter, and just let you sit with that for a little bit before I finish up on the hormones. We'll start again the next one, beginning with ADH and aldosterone. Thanks for listening.